Boom, da-ba-doom, boom, da-ba-doom.
Money is an emotional freaking topic here. It's not emotional like we're going to break out crying. It's emotional because it's very important to people.
Welcome back, everyone, to another amazing episode of the Money Peach Podcast. Today, my guest on the show is co-founder and CEO of Blooom. That's Blooom with 3 O's, Chris Costello. Chris and his team at Blooom, they are revolutionizing the way that your 401k or whatever employer-sponsored plan that you have, it could be a 403b, a 457, or whatever it is being managed. You see, Chris is from the financial planning world, and he'll tell you straight up that the fees are ridiculous, the basis points don't make sense, and the ongoing commissions are out of control. And to make that worse, if you don't have a high net worth, no one even wants to help you anymore. So Chris created Blooom with him and his brothers, where they get together and they manage your 401k, get this, for $10 per month. Flat fee. They call it Netflix pricing. It's an incredible program. I love it. I've gotten to know Chris now over the last couple months, and I love what they're doing. I love their mission, and I begged him to come on the show to talk about not only what they're doing, but talk about what you can be doing to be wise, to pay attention, and to make yourself better off as far as investing and managing your 401k. So without further ado, let me bring on Chris Costello, co-founder, CEO of Blooom. Remember, Blooom with 3 O's. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Money Peach Podcast. Excited to have you on. I met you a few weeks ago at FinCon in Dallas. We went to a Mavericks game together, had a great time. So I just want to introduce you to our audience. Say hello.
Awesome, Chris. Well, thank you for having me. And did you know, maybe a little embarrassed to admit, so I'm 44 years old. That was my first NBA game ever that night.
Really? Well, you're in Kansas, correct?
Right. And specifically in Kansas, we don't actually need an NBA team. You know why, Chris?
Why is that?
Because I am a University of Kansas graduate, so we have KU basketball that completely scratches that itch as far as basketball goes in this area.
Yes, and I've heard this. See, I went to Arizona State. Yes, I went to Arizona State University. So we're like the fourth biggest university in the United States, and we have not been able to put together a basketball team or a football team since I went to school there in 2001. And it's embarrassing. It's completely embarrassing.
Aren't you guys always like number one party school every year in the country, though? Isn't that what your claim to fame is down there?
I guess it is, yes. And like I don't like even telling my parents that because they crunched some numbers to get me into school. So that was not one of the things. They have a really good wrestling program. I'll tell you that. Well,
good. Well, you got through there, and so all the good things and that came along with that, you got through it.
So, Chris Costello, your company is called Blooom, Bloom, so 3 O's. And I remember when I first heard about Blooom, I'm like, somebody keeps spelling it wrong, right? There's 3 O's here. But before we jump into what Blooom is, tell me a little bit about what you've been up to the last decade.
Yeah, well, actually, technically it's been since, I guess, the last 2 decades. So when I got out of school out of the University of Kansas in 1995, I became a stockbroker. But they don't even use that term anymore, Chris, anymore. But in 1995, I got a job as a stockbroker, then worked my way to some of the big, Wall Street-based brokerage firms and kind of evolved into more of a what they call financial advisor, wealth advisor, financial consultant, things of that nature. But we didn't really like the conflicts that we saw every single day inherent inside of these big brokerage firms. The way the fee structures were, the way that there was back then at least some incentive to sell products, and just never felt like it was a truly unbiased advice. And so my business partner, Kevin, who obviously is one of the other co-founders of Blooom, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we started plotting our plan to leave those big firms and start our own independent, unconflicted, fiduciary, client-centric firm. And then in 2004, we did just that. We started our own, I now call it a brick and mortar firm, now that I've got a digital firm in Blooom, but back then didn't call it that, but a wealth management firm catered specifically to, at that time, people who were knocking on the doorstep of retirement. And generally, when we first got the firm going in 2004, generally people that had at least $500,000 in their portfolio. But as the years went by, and this will lead me up when we start talking about Blooom, as the years went by, we actually started to raise that account minimum. And towards the end, Chris, I wasn't even taking clients generally unless they had at least $1 million, if not well north of that, in their investment portfolio. And here's the sad irony about this. It really became one of the reasons why we started Blooom, was that my own mom and dad did not have anywhere near enough money to have qualified, and I use that word intentionally, to be a client of my firm. And that bothered me. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want your listeners to think I'm an a-hole. I mean, they were my clients. I was definitely helping my mom and dad. But had it not been for me as the owner of the firm, that they would have had no access. There would have been no advisor out there that was willing to dip down to the level of assets that they had to really spend time and try and help them. And that was a big reason why in 2013 we decided to build a firm. We needed technology because we're trying to get this out to millions of people. We can't do this with humans, there's just too many people that need help. So we had to build it using technology, but specifically we're trying to help that segment of Americans like my mom and dad that don't have a bunch of, millions of dollars. They may only have $8,000 or, $3,000 or $52,000 or, but that's most of America. And that's who Blooom is dead set on helping, especially when it comes to the retirement accounts, a 457 account, a 401k, a 403b.
And I'm glad you talked about that. When I got hired as a firefighter, I'm a brand new firefighter, and my wife is, she has her 401k. We started off without investing because we went down the debt route. We thought it was more fun to invest in cars that went down in value and vacations, and all that normal stuff. And so we actually went completely broke in 2011. We turned it all around, paid off our debt, everything but our house, saved up an emergency fund. And from that point, we thought, okay, it's time to invest. It's time to start saving money. And so I thought, naive me, I'd never been taught this stuff before. I thought that, anybody and their mother would want to take me as a client, right? And I have no funds, and I really didn't understand how they got paid, and I didn't really care. I was just like, I wanted to invest. And so what I learned is there is a complete lack of education out there on all these terms. So before we go any further, because we talked about this before we hit record, is I want to just throw some terms at you and have you answer that for us, because I know so many of us, we're almost afraid to raise our hand and say, excuse me, what does fiduciary mean? Or what does a basis point mean? So I'm going to throw some terms at you just real quick so we can go back and forth, because I want this to be as valuable as possible for you, for I, but also for the listener, because this is the platform where they could get their questions answered without having to raise their hand in public and say, I don't know what that means. So real quick, tell me what a fiduciary is, because you used that term about a minute ago.
Yeah, so it's something that I think a lot of people might have heard the term somewhere associated with financial services, but I think the industry at large has done a pretty poor job of really helping people understand what that is. So in the business of giving advice to a client, so I'm an advisor. I've got a client sitting in front of me, whether physically or even digitally, and I need to give advice. And there are two different standards of advice in the industry. One is I need to give advice to you that is suitable. What that means is, Chris, let's say you were a 70-year-old widow, and I'm looking at the types of investments to recommend to you. I need to recommend something that is suitable for a 70-year-old widow. So a high technology, high risk stock is probably not suitable for a 70-year-old widow living on a fixed income. I'm using an extreme example, but I think that gets the point across. So when an advisor is making recommendations, they need to be making recommendations that are suitable for their client based on, again, their age, maybe their income, their situation, levels of debt, maybe some other factors. And every single advisor in this country has to follow that. But then only certain, and this is actually, when I say this, you and your listeners are going to be like, it's almost like unbelievable. But there's only certain advisors in the industry that have to go beyond suitability and act in terms of being a fiduciary. And what I mean by that is, let's take, Chris, you're sitting in front of me. Okay, you and your wife are sitting in front of me, and you've got $5,000 or $10,000 you're looking to invest. I've asked you some questions. Now I'm at the point where I'm about to make a recommendation to you to where to put that money. And I'm looking at a couple different funds that are suitable for you. You guys are young, so you can afford to maybe take a little bit more risk than that 70-year-old widow I was talking about a moment ago. So I've got a couple different funds I'm looking at. A lot of people in financial services that are brokers only have to recommend to you, again, something that is suitable. When you're a fiduciary, though, which we are at Blooom, which is what I was at my firm before Blooom, I have to then take a look a little bit deeper and look at, like, what's the cost of this investment? And even if the investment pays me less, If it is a lower cost investment for you and your wife, Chris, as a fiduciary, that is what I should be advising to you. The broker that only has to make a suitable recommendation does not have to look at that cost issue. So if there's one of those two funds that's suitable for you, a broker could actually recommend the one to you that's significantly more expensive for you and your wife and pays them a lot more. A fiduciary cannot do that. And some people in financial services are fiduciaries, but a lot of people are not. And we talk about all the time. I think that you need to make sure when you're sitting down in front of an advisor, when your listeners, if they get to a point where they're sitting down in front of an advisor, you need to flat out look that person in the eye and ask them the question, do you have to act in my best interest? Are you a fiduciary? Let me repeat that. Are you compelled to act in my best interest, and are you a fiduciary? That should be a question that everybody is asking to any advisor that's trying to give you advice, whether it's investing advice, some of these complex insurance products that are getting sold today. Those are the questions you need to ask. And if they cannot tell you that they have to ask in your best interest, if they say, no, I don't have to act as a fiduciary, I'm not saying that everybody on that, I'm not trying to overly generalize and say all those people in that business are not good people, because there's tons of good people that are just brokers. But I would think long and hard about trusting the advice if you don't feel a lot of confidence in the person sitting in front of you. I mean, obviously, if they're a close friend, you trust them, they were recommended to you, that might be a different thing. But if you're walking in cold and they're not a fiduciary, I'd be really, really, really leery of that.
Chris, I just finished Tony Robbins' book called Unshakable.
Yeah,
and
great book.
One of the quotes he puts in there is 10% of advisors are fiduciaries. Mm-hmm. So you have a 1 in 10 chance right there, right? So I'm glad you said that. I was going to actually say that afterwards, but definitely ask that question. You know, are you a fiduciary? Are you supposed to be acting in my best interest?
Which, remember a second ago I said it's crazy to think that people in financial services, that they actually don't have to act in what's in your best interest. They can act legally in their best interest. That's shocking.
It is. And I would recommend anybody, if you haven't, pick up the book Unshakable. We'll put notes in the show links to it, but it really opens up your eyes to what's kind of going on behind the scenes and helps you ask those questions when you do sit down with an advisor, if you do. So the next question I have, I get this question all the time, is, Chris, people are always telling me to go with low cost funds, make sure I pay attention to my fees. And so I had a question the other day, someone emailed me saying, where do I even find how much a fund costs? Like, I don't go and, go to the store and say, here's a fund and it's $5, right?
Yeah.
So where do you find that? If you're looking at your 401k account, when somebody says, where are the fees, what should you be looking at?
Brother, I got to tell you, it's not easy. To be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why we think, and I'm not trying to plug Blooom here, but that's one of the reasons why we think something like Blooom is very helpful, because the fact of the matter is it's a freaking PhD thesis to try and figure out really what the fees are inside of your retirement account. It's a process of gathering prospectuses on each of the funds, turning to page 32 and looking in the fine print buried somewhere, and the fees are called a bunch of different things. There's sadly no easy way for most people to sit down quickly and ever be able to figure out, what in the world you're paying inside of this thing. And it's crazy because these fees, we're talking about your retirement account. The analogy I use with fees, Chris, is think of fees inside your 401k, your 457, your retirement account, kind of like termites, okay? So termites in your house, think about how those nasty things work. You can't see them, but they can do massive amounts of damage if they're not kept in check, right? That's the same thing that is happening with these hidden fees inside of your 401k. So I don't have any advice how people can easily go figure these things out. That is part of the problem in this industry that Blooom is trying to solve. It's one of the things that anybody that comes to Blooom that takes 3 or 4 minutes and gets the free analysis will actually help you figure those out. Because it's important. There are radically different costs inside of the funds inside of your 401k. And it should be easier for average Americans to figure those things out. But it's definitely something that we're doing for our clients.
All right. The next term I'm going to throw at you is, you hear this all the time. It's 27 basis points, or it's only 4 basis points. What does that mean? So
basis points is basically a percentage of a fee, a certain amount of a percentage. And a lot of advisors will charge a certain percentage based on the amount of assets in the portfolio. In other words, the size of the account. So a lot of face-to-face advisors will charge their clients 1% a year to manage the money. And if they're good advisors, they should also be giving, including financial planning in that as well too. So if you had a $100,000 account and the advisor charged 1%, you would pay that advisor $1,000 a year for the help of them managing that portfolio. And again, they should also, in my opinion, be including some financial planning, some help, some advice included in that number. When people start saying things like 50 basis points, that's the equivalent of 1/2 of 1%. That is Wall Street at its finest in their pricing model that is meant to be a little bit, in my opinion, maybe a little bit misleading to the average investor. So it's, instead of saying, we're going to charge you X thousands of dollars a year, they can just say, we just charge 1%. We didn't like that at Blooom. We didn't like the fact that most people didn't understand basis points, and we're trying to be as transparent and as simple as possible. So we decided to charge the same thing, basically the first financial services firm maybe to charge a Netflix-like monthly fee. So we charge $10 a month for the privilege of having access to an advisor and having somebody handle your retirement account for you.
Yeah. Who would have ever guessed that Wall Street or the financial world wants to confuse everyday people into not understanding certain things?
Yeah.
And I'll take that a step further. The other day, I got one of my prospectuses in the mail, and I'm like, I'm going to go through this. I'm going to actually go through it page by page. And what I came up with is those things were printed to never be read. Right? They were created to never be read, to look so ugly, so boring, have the font be so hard to read that, hey, they sent it to you, right? They covered their end, but
they covered their end. Yeah.
I couldn't understand anything.
Chris, I'm a financial advisor with 22 years of experience, and I can't understand a lot of what's written inside of those prospectuses. So
there
how
you go.
in the world? Yeah. I mean, it's no chance that most people are really going to be able to understand what's being explained to them inside of that. But here's what I want to make this point. Wealthy people haven't had to figure that out. Wealthy people have had this stuff done for them for decades. Before Blooom, when I was working with people worth millions of dollars, I wasn't forcing them to read the prospectus. I wasn't forcing them to understand all these complexities around investing. They came to me. They had a big portfolio. I was willing to help them. And guess what? I did everything for them. I placed all the trades for them. I gave them great advice. I told them what to stay away from. I was a fiduciary. And you could almost make the case, arguably, that those people needed the help less than the people without money. And that bothered Kevin and I. We're like, there's so many people out there that really need this help, arguably more than wealthy people do. And we shouldn't be expecting, the business model shouldn't be such that if you don't qualify, and I use that word intentionally, with having a bunch of dough in your account, if you don't qualify, you're forced to DIY it. The only other option is to try and figure this out. And the deck has been stacked against people. These prospectuses, the jargon, the basis points, the lack of transparency, all this stuff. It's no wonder why a lot of people tune this stuff out. It's no wonder why people feel like they're behind financially, because it's been stacked against them. We're trying to change that. I think that we can. I think that, we're going to be able to reach people in a radically different way. We speak to people as human beings. We charge people a fair number. There's no other hidden anything. We're not making money anywhere else. It's just the $10 a month, and providing like the same advice that I used to give to millionaires, I get to give to everybody that will engage with Blooom. And Chris, do we have time for a little anecdotal story to make this point?
Absolutely.
Okay. So before Blooom, I thought we really did a great job for these wealthy clients. We would know everything about them. Everything down to the name of their dog, and if they, and specifically, like, let's say, for example, they still carried a mortgage. So they're wealthy, but they maybe still have a mortgage on a house or something. I would know exactly what their mortgage rate was on that property. And anytime interest rates would drop enough where I thought it made sense for that client to actually go refinance that mortgage, I would be the one as their advisor that reach out to them and say, hey, Chris, your mortgage is like 4.5%. The rates today are closer to 3.5%. I think you and your wife, you said you're going to stay in your house for a while. I think it would make sense for you guys to go look into refinancing. We'd send them to somebody in town that we had a relationship with to go get it refinanced. We never made any money off that transaction, just kind of a favor to the client. They were already paying us enough money for the advice we were giving them. So they'd go get their mortgage refinanced. They'd come back to me a month or so later. They say, man, that was kind of a pain to refinance the mortgage, but I'm glad I did because, my payment went down by $200, or we used to have a 30-year mortgage. Now we've only got a 15-year mortgage. Awesome. So the house is going to be paid off sooner. Cool. Great advice. But my question to you is like, for somebody that's worth $4 million to save $200 a month on their mortgage, I mean, is that really needle moving? Like, have we done, okay, it's like, it's cool. Thanks. I mean, $200 is $200, but they're worth 4 million or 5 million. And it's not needle moving. Now, here's the other part of the story though. So 2 years ago, I'm sitting at home. I mean, Bloom's been around for almost 5 years, but 2 years ago, I'm sitting at home at night and I'm like, I wonder what my younger sister's mortgage is. She lives in a town about 30 miles down the road. So I text my sister, Annie. And I said, Annie, what's the mortgage rate on your house right now? And she texts right back, how in the heck would I know? It's literally what she, in her typical sarcastic response. And I said, all right, well, go find a copy of a statement that's been mailed to you. Take a picture of it with your phone and send it to me. So she does it. I see that her mortgage is like 4 5/8. And this was like a couple of years ago. And I think the 30-year rates at that time were like in the low threes. I'm like, oh my gosh. Please go talk to this guy in town about refinancing your mortgage. You got to dig up a lot of paperwork, but trust me, it'll be worth it. So a month later, Chris, Annie comes back to me or texts me back or something. She's like, dude, my mortgage payment went down by almost $300 a month. She's like, that's about half of what I'm paying for childcare. That's needle move. That's Absolutely. Big time. And here's the issue. Nobody's looking out for the Annies in this country. There's no service out there. The wealthy people are getting that advice and cool, save $200. But how many tens of millions of Annies are there out there right now? And nobody's got a vested interest in trying to help them. And those are the types of things that I think we have an opportunity to do. We have to use technology. Because there's so many people like my sister, we got to figure out ways of using technology to help people and to give this kind of advice. Because the longer term goal with Blooom is to try and build a company that through digital means is delivering all of the wonderful services that I used to do as a certified financial planner for wealthy people. I think we can do a lot of that through technology and then really start to affect the lives of a lot of people.
What would life feel like if you no longer had to worry about money? What would life look like with $10,000 in the bank and zero debt? Do you realize you're really only a few decisions away from living life on your terms and not the bank's? How do I know this? Well, because we were once living paycheck to paycheck, completely broke and facing a mountain of debt. However, fast forward to today, we're debt-free, we're building wealth, and we live life on our terms, not the bank's. So now it's your turn. I would love for you to join me on my free workshop where I share the same step-by-step system we use to take back our life and our money once and for all. So head on over to moneypeach.com/workshop and grab your free spot in this online training that you're going to absolutely love. Once again, that's moneypeach.com/workshop. Okay, so this is where I want to transition and actually start really diving into Blooom. So when you and I talked at that Mavericks game, I had told you, hey, I'm also a firefighter. You said, who's out there looking out for the firefighters and the nurses and the teachers and the police officers? Who's out there looking for, the middle class, right? The 1%'s taken care of, right?
Yep.
Because they have a network of 5 or 10 million, but what's going on in that middle? There's nobody. So then I took a step further and I asked you, I said, it's so funny is I have what's called a 457. So a 457, if you guys are listening, if you're in a government type job, it's like a 401k. It's called deferred compensation. I remember when I was looking at my 457, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm like, man, I feel stupid. I don't know how to pick. There's 12 different funds. And I'm like, I don't know, And I think a lot of times you get hired in a new job and you're excited and the HR department comes in and says, all right, here's your retirement plan. And you're like, oh, just pick whatever you think. That's like the financial advice that you're getting. I'm not kidding. That's how it went down. So that's what I really like about Blooom. And so I want to dive into it, but let's go in and let's just kind of talk about from the beginning, how does Blooom work?
Well, first of all, man, I want to thank you for being a firefighter. I think people like you need to constantly be thanked. Every time I see a firefighter, police officer, somebody that served our country in the military, I always make it a point to say thank you, because you guys aren't paid what you're worth. So thank you. My best friend in the world is a captain in the police department. I get to hear all the stories behind the scenes of the scary times that he's had. And I've done a couple ride-alongs with him in the past before, and I've literally seen him go to a call before at 2:00 in the morning. So I was doing a ride-along with him, and it's a school, and an alarm's gone off, and he's by himself, and he's walking around this property, and who knows what he's going to run into. That's what guys like you are doing. And so you can't be thanked enough for that. So
appreciate that.
The other thing I wanted to mention, and then I'll talk about Blooom, is that you said you had 12 options to pick from inside of your firefighter 457 plan. That's actually good. We've seen some plans out there that there's like 100 options. And I joke that 100 options and flavors of mustard are good when you're at Costco. Like, that choice is good when you're at Costco, but it's terrible inside of 401k plans. It just adds to the confusion. People are like, holy cow, how am I supposed to pick from 50 or 100 of these options? So it's actually good that you only had 12 options to pick from. So and I talk a lot in stories and anecdotes and analogies, but what led us to Blooom was this belief that, like you said, the wealthy, the 1%, they're totally taken care of. But then everybody else, the way the business model is set up is that you're kind of just forced to, read a brochure or a pamphlet and kind of just figure this stuff out for yourself. And I have a theory that there are certain things in life as a human that we shouldn't be expected to DIY. For example, I'm talking to you right now. If I have an appendicitis right now, I know that I'm not, like, one of the options is not for me to take my own appendix out. Okay. Like, I know it's just a given. I'm going to go to the ER room, and there's going to be a surgeon that will perform the appendectomy for me. Okay. I'm not going to have to show that surgeon a statement of net worth. I'm not going to have to qualify. He's not going to ask me how much I've saved for retirement. I know that he is going to take my appendix out if that's what needs to be. And we feel like something as important as your retirement savings, it should not be a forced DIY proposition. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people in this country that are capable, enjoy, have an interest in finances and investing and things of that nature. But if you don't have an interest and you don't qualify by having a big account, we should not ram home this forced DIY proposition. So I think we've now got kind of the ethos or the reasons behind why we started Blooom. So what in the heck is Blooom? So Blooom is a digital advisor that sits on top of, if you will, your 401k, your 403b, or in your case, Chris, your 457. So we're not setting up the plan. You have to have the plan set up. It might be at Fidelity or Vanguard or Schwab or John Hancock. There's, dozens of different companies that set up these types of retirement plans, for you and employees at other companies. And then to your point, you're like, okay, cool. I've got this plan. I got 12 options. Now what do I do? The option for you, Chris, you're not supposed to walk into your HR director and ask them what you're supposed to do, because they're not financial advisors. And you shouldn't have to get online and Google, what am I supposed to do with this dang thing? Because again, I go back to this point again. If you're a wealthy client, you'd take that 401k list of choices over to your advisor and they'd help you pick that out. So that's what Blooom is doing. But instead of having to meet with somebody face to face or even over the phone, you can go to the Blooom website, Blooom with 3 O's, and then click on that Get Started button. It'll take about 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes or so. It is done, I think, in the most simple manner ever in the history of financial services. We ask, I think the hardest question we ask somebody is when they would like to smash their alarm clock, AKA when do you want to stop working? And you kind of walk through this really kind of a fun process where you basically link up you got to have a 401k or a 457 or 403b account. You got to have that thing set up first. And then you'll link that account to Blooom. Blooom goes in, does some analysis on that for free. All this is free at this point. You haven't paid us anything. And then we display for you an image of a flower. And we use that flower to convey the health of your account. And what we're looking for specifically, without getting too in depth, is we're looking for things like okay, Chris, you told us you were 29 years old and you'd like to be done. You'd like to have the ability to stop working when you're 59, let's just say. And so now we know that critical time period of today versus how far until you need that money. So in that case, that's 30 years. Okay. As an investment advisor, we programmed our technology to know kind of roughly how much risk stocks and bonds somebody who's got 3 decades until they need the money should have. So we take a look at, do you have roughly the right mix of stocks and bonds? Then we look at, do you have good diversification? And what I mean by diversification is we're making sure basically you don't have too many eggs in too few baskets. We've all heard that saying before, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So we're kind of checking to make sure you don't have any of that problem in the 401k. And then the third thing we're checking for is fees, like we talked about earlier. So we can go in and see how much you're paying in fees. Maybe the first time ever that people are seeing how much they're actually paying in hidden fees inside your 401k. By the way, let's just say this one more time. Just because you can't see the fees, you're not writing a check for the fees, you're not seeing a line item bill for those fees, trust me, they're there. Every single 401k plan in the United States, there are hidden fees inside the funds, inside those plans, period. Let's just put that aside. They're there. We'll let you know how much those are and then make a guess, an estimate, and sometimes an exact example of what we think we can lower your fees to. And I'll explain how we do that in just a second. And then we show you, using the image of this flower, how your overall account should be invested. And really, that's totally free. You could stop there if you wanted to and kind of say, okay, cool. Thanks for the advice. You got three minutes of your life invested in this. And you could kind of take that advice and try and follow it yourself if you wanted to, if you were kind of a do-it-yourselfer. But then if you're like, you know what, I'm being honest with myself, I don't understand this as much as I should. I don't pay attention. I don't think about this very often. I realize this is going to be important at some point. You can then choose to decide at that point to put a credit or debit card in. It's $10 a month. It is cancel at any time. So if at any time our clients feel like they're not getting $10 of value per month, then they can cancel it at any time. But if you hire us, then what happens is Blooom goes back into the account again. And before, when we were just analyzing your account, Chris, we were really only looking at the investments you picked. You might have only picked 2 or 3 out of that choice of 12. But after you sign up, our software goes back into your account, virtually basically, and looks around at all the options you could pick from, because we need to know what all your choices are, good, bad, or indifferent. And then we start to build an allocation for you. And one of the important things I want to point out is the way our algorithm works, the way the technology works, is we have programmed this to look for the lowest cost fund available to get us exposure and get you diversified. So there's some stats on our website. I think on average, pre-Blooom, post-Blooom sign up, we've been able to drop the average Blooom client's fees by about 40%. Keep in mind, that is your gosh dang money we're talking about. It's not your employer's. It's not Wall Street. That is your money. So that 40% savings is more money in your pocket, in your account, that at some point, and we don't need to get off into compound growth, but imagine if we're saving, a couple $100 this year. Imagine what that'll grow to over the next 30 years, because it's every single year. At that point, then, once we've got the portfolio built using low-cost funds, the Blooom technology will start placing the trades for you. So this is not an advice engine. We're not going to, if you hire Blooom, we're not going to email you and say, Chris, here's now what you have to go do. At that point, we're going to place the trades for you, and then we're going to keep this thing monitored for you. So as the markets change, as you get older, we will adjust this for you. And as the markets change inside of the account, and then the other big thing that our clients, every single one of our clients has access to, no additional fee, is you have access to what we call Ask the Advisor. So we try and encourage and educate our clients that as they're living their life, as they are living their life and they come across any kind of money question, we want them to know that your first thought should be to pull out your phone and message Blooom. Message Blooom with any question. Like, it could be, a lot of questions we get, Chris, are things like, hey, I'm still paying off student loan debt. I'm wondering if I should be contributing to my 401k. If so, how much? We get questions about mortgages. We get questions like, what's a 529? We get questions about IRAs. I mean, anything in people's lives dealing with money, we want our clients to know, if you're confused, don't Google it. Message Blooom, and one of the advisors, the licensed advisors at Blooom, will get back to you. And you don't get charged for that. It's included in that $10 fee that you're paying. Does that make sense?
That's incredible. So Chris, one of the questions that I had asked you at the Mavericks game, it was one of that moments where you kind of like that aha moment was, I said, Chris, you're telling me you're doing, you're going to invest in people, or you're going to help people with their 401ks at an extremely low rate. You called it the Netflix pricing, which I really liked. Mm-hmm. So it's $10 a month. And kind of put that in perspective, I have a buddy at the station. He's been on for, I think, 8 years. He's maxed out his 457 every single year. Right now, he's doing $18,000 a year into his 457. And so I was talking to him the other day. He's like, I got like $125,000 in my account. And I'm like, man, you got 8 years in the fire service, and you've already set aside with growth $125,000. If you were to look at the 1%, right? If you're going to have that actively managed at 1%, that 1% is going to represent $1,250 a year. And you're doing it for $120 a year. Right. And so I had asked you, I said, Chris, at $10 a month, how are you guys generating income? And then on top of that, having an advisor, a professionally trained advisor, get back to these questions. How are you accomplishing this?
Yeah, it's a totally fair question. And at this point, one of the things I think that this is actually advice I would give to other entrepreneurs. I think the mistake that a lot of people make when starting a company like this is they start to think ahead too much about, well, how's this going to work when we have 1 million clients, and they start to think about all the things that, well, the term that people use is, can you scale this? Okay. And we look at it from a different perspective. None of this is about we're not trying to be the lowest cost provider. We're really not. Because part of my core, Chris, around pricing is I feel like price is only an issue in the absence of value.
That makes sense.
I believe that with all of my heart. If you are delivering something of value, you don't need to compete on price. Sure, low cost is nice, but it is absolutely not kind of our lead, the value proposition we're bringing to the table. So I think that needs to be important. The other thing is, we are just trying to build the best possible service for who our target market client is today. And we'll worry about the problems of like, how do you deliver that when you have 1 million clients? I call that a nice problem to have. I'm sure that the service could evolve, in the years to come in a different way. Today, it's totally doable. A lot of the questions we get are, complex questions maybe from our clients, but they're questions that we see a lot. And they're ones that I've been used to answering, for 20 years. And the other thing is, a lot of people that are our target market, and our target market, Chris, is really kind of mid 20-ish to kind of the mid 40-ish range. And so we have clients younger than that right out of school. We certainly have clients that are older than that. But that's where a lot of our target market is. And a lot of those people, truthfully, don't want to go through a drawn out face-to-face meeting with an advisor. They don't want to sit down and do a long plan. That kind of seems like having to go to the dentist or get your blood drawn. A lot of people, it's just kind of little course corrections in life, little nuggets of advice and information here and a question here. And you're getting it from a trusted source at Blooom that's not conflicted, because we're not trying to sell you other products. So far, it's been something that we can manage. I'd love to have you ask me that question in 5 years. Hopefully we've got 1 million clients at that point, and I'm sure it might look a little bit different how we're handling that at that time. But for now, it's manageable.
What's the average balance, if you know it off the top of your head, of the 401ks, the 457s, the 403bs, just kind of overall? What would you say the median balance is, so our listeners can kind of get an idea?
Actually, that's the right way of answering. The median is better than the average. So the median account balance at Blooom today is about $40,000.
Okay, so just doing the math in my head, tell me if this is right. That's 0.4%, correct? Managed.
Did you just do the math on 120 off of, is that what you're doing?
120 divided by, say, 40,000?
40, yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, 0.3%. Yeah. So you're at 0.3%. Yep. And, we had said earlier, and I agree with this, is most managed funds are about 1%. Funds under management is what you're paying. Mm-hmm. So this is 70% cheaper.
It is, but you know what? Let's talk about that, because yes, that is lower cost. But let's actually hypothetically say we did charge 1%. Okay. So let's say you got 40 grand in your retirement account, and instead of charging 120 bucks, let's say Blooom charged 400, which is 1%. Okay. We've talked about fees today, and it's certainly obviously something that we feel strongly about. I explained how our algorithm works. I kind of believe when it comes to investing, you should embrace the things that you can take control of, and keeping your fees low is actually something that you can actually do as a human. We can't control the markets day to day, year to year even, but you can be mindful of your fees. And the other thing you can be good about doing is having kind of the right, roughly, there's no one right answer, but getting your overall stock to bond mix correct. And again, no one right answer, but again, somebody that's very, very young should not have all of their retirement account in a money market or a bond fund. Those are things that we have a fighting chance of controlling fees and the kind of the overall stock to bond ratio in the account. But here's something, Chris, that trumps everything. And that's why I say, even if we were charging 1%, a lot of people don't realize that over the last 20 years, 30 years, it doesn't even matter what time period you pick. If you take a look at some period of time of at least 10 years, and you look at what the stock market in general has performed, how it's averaged over that time period, and then you look at human being investors, how they have averaged over that same time period, there is a ridiculous gap between the two. And I'm kind of going off of memory here a little bit. But I think over like the last 30 years, the average rate of return of the U.S. stock market, we're not talking about international for now, but let's just say the U.S. stock market, I think has been around kind of the 9 to 10% ish range. Don't hold me to that number, but I'm right within 1 or 2%. But the average human individual investor that's had money in the market during that time period, their rate of return has been something crazy like 3%. Like, there is a massive gap between what individual investors are seeing on average and what the market itself is returning. You want to take some guesses at why that's happening? Do you have some ideas on that?
Yeah, people are missing the 10 best days of the market because you pull out because of fear, or you go into cash or money market because of fear, and then you miss the rebound, right? You did exactly what you're not supposed to do. You bought high and sold low.
Bingo. It's 100% around investor behavior. And so what if you kept your fees low and you got 3%? Like, at the end of the day, like, oh, I really minimized the fees, but I behaved like an idiot with my investments, and my rate of return over 20 years was 3%. I would argue that, well, maybe your focus on fees was not that important, versus what if you would have paid a little bit more, had access to an advisor, and that advisor kept you from making those terrible mistakes. And yes, you paid 1%, but you actually got the 9% rate of return of the market. I'd still argue that you are massively massively further ahead in that scenario. Now, I actually think there's a way to have both of those. I mean, Blooom, clearly we can help minimize fees. And what I really hope, Chris, at the end of the day, I think the most needle moving thing that Blooom could do in this world is if we can wrap our arms around a big number of people in this country and somehow inoculate them from that crap. Because I almost need this podcast with you in time to explain this. There's no like Facebook ad or message on Twitter that we could ever do to really explain this concept, because it's kind of hard to understand. It takes some explaining, but this is where all the value is. This is where everything lies. Right here is that massive gap between people left to their own devices and what just the market on its own, the market in all of its good, bad, ugly, in different days. That 30-year time period, Chris, assumes the stock market crash of 87, assumes the dot-com bubble of 2000, 2001, 02, assumes the financial crisis. Even through all those times, it still averaged like 9% a year. But the only way you got that 9% a year is if you didn't buy in and out and chase high and sell low and get scared and get greedy and all these things that happen to people. And it's hard for people even sometimes to understand. They're like, well, I'm smart. I understand this, but damn it, money is an emotional freaking topic here. It's not emotional like we're going to break out crying. It's emotional because it's very important to people. You know, if we took a quick poll somehow, we had all of your listeners say, tell me in your life, what's the top 4 most important things in your world, your life? Most people would say probably their family, their health, and they may not say money, but they might say financial security, you know, maybe a roof over my head, things, but maybe for some people it's spirituality in the top 4 too. But my point is that money's probably in the top 4, maybe 5 for almost all people in some way, shape, or form. And because it's so high in the food chain, it's a very emotional point of topic. And so people get scared and the financial crisis comes along and people think they're doing the right thing. They think they're protecting themselves and their family by bailing out. And then all of a sudden, then they're in that category. Then they're in the 3% range. You've just joined the ranks of all those people that have underperformed the stock market. And it's not because you paid too much in fees. It's not actually even because you picked investments. It's because you took your money in and out. And somebody told you about this awesome fund that they made 80% in last year, and you go back to your desk and you put your money in it just in time for it to go down by 50% because your buddy that told you about it, that's yesterday's news. It's that kind of stuff. It's people getting scared. I could go on for hours about this because I've seen this firsthand. You know, I remember in the late 1990s, I had people, smart, retired clients calling me up, Chris, when Yahoo stock was trading at $400 a share, saying, hey, you know, I've heard all, you know, Yahoo, people are making all this money in Yahoo. Should we be buying Yahoo? It's at $400 a share. And then 16 months later, when Yahoo was at $14 a share, guess how many people called and asked about buying it there? None. My feeling is that somehow at birth, the wires in our heads got crossed because we know as consumers, when we're out shopping for groceries, for cars, for a new house, we all know to look for good deals and good bargains. But somehow the wires got crossed when it comes to investments, and people are wired to want to buy things that have run up in value. And they're wired to want to bail out of things when they've gone down. And if we could somehow reverse engineer, flip those wires around, that's a pretty big secret in investing, to be able to kind of flip those things around and think of the stock market. I'm guessing a lot of your listeners are young. The next time the market goes down, if you'll remember this, the next time the stock market goes down, you need to train your brain into thinking that that is a sale, because that is exactly what is happening. The market has effectively gone on sale. In fact, if you're young and you're saving money right now, you should actually get excited when the market tanks, because all of a sudden those dollars that you're putting in each week, every 2 weeks in your paycheck or each month that's going into that retirement account, guess what? You're buying more with the same dollars. When that market price declines, the investments you're buying, they've dropped in value. You're buying more at a lower price. It's amazing, the beauty of dollar cost averaging. It works without you even having to think about it. When the price of the investments go down, you automatically accumulate more without even having to do anything different. You just same savings amount. And then when the market goes higher and the price goes higher, you buy fewer. You haven't had to do anything different. You've just got that same $200 every 2 weeks, and it's working like magic. I actually call dollar cost averaging into your 401k one of the wonders of the world in the way that it works, because it automatically for you will buy a little bit more when the market goes down, just because the price of things drop, and the opposite happens when the markets are at high levels like they are today.
I love your passion for this. Like, you're getting me so fired up right now. These are the things that, you know, I want everybody listening to just, you know, take it, put it in your head, let it sit there for a second, and then let it sink down into your heart so it becomes habit. You know, don't stop investing. When your broke neighbor tells you oh, there's a crash happening, you should pull out. No, you should be upping it, increasing it, cut back in other places of your life and buy the blue light special, right? Get whatever you can while it's cheap. And I just love how, you know, I'm not saying it now. I love hearing it from you. So Chris, we're running close on time here. So I'm going to hit you up with something that I always ask everybody on the show is, if there's anything you can do for our listeners, what could you throw at us?
Yeah, let me answer that. Let me say something real quick. The reason I'm so passionate about this, and you'll relate to this too, because I know you had a background where you were training people to get people their health back in shape. And there was people, Chris, and you probably thought about this, that you affected, and it was maybe it's 5 years ago, okay? And you were working with them, maybe you got them on an exercise regimen, or maybe you changed their diet a little bit. you may never know this because you may never see those people again, but there are certain people that you helped in that regard. They're going to live long. They're actually going to live longer. Like you altered people's lives with that advice that you gave them. And again, you may not be able to be around to see and reap the reward of seeing that, but undoubtedly there are people that are actually going to spend more time on this planet because of that. And we actually feel the same sort of passion around this with finance. Because I think about if people will listen to the advice, if they'll let us help them with their 401k, I'm confident that we're going to be able to put them in a position where they might be able to stop working maybe a year, maybe a two, maybe a couple years sooner than had they not found Blooom. And what is that? What is that worth to be able to stop working and put that control back into your life? Like you may stop working and maybe you want to go volunteer, or maybe you want to travel the world for a year, or maybe you want to start a new business or whatever. But like having that ability where all of a sudden you're in control to make that decision because of some smart financial decisions that you made and you were helped with at an early stage, what is that worth? We talk about like extending the amount of time between your last day at work and your last day on that planet. That's why I think people here at Blooom are so passionate, is we recognize that we have that ability to do this. We're not building something like, we're not building the next freaking Snap crap or whatever that app is called, Snapchat. I mean, like at the end, there is nobody that's going to get to the end of their life and look back and think, oh, my life, other than the founder of the company maybe, but the users of Snapchat aren't going to think it when they're 98 years old and they're reflecting on their life. They're not going to think back and think, that Snapchat, that really enhanced my life. I'm really glad that I used that. But you know what? When you were helping people with their health and getting their bodies healthy, and now what you're doing with your podcast, and now what we're doing with Blooom, absolutely there could be people that would reflect back on that and think, you know what, that did change my life. And I had 2 more years to travel around and see grandkids because somebody was willing to help me when I was 29 years old. That's huge. So the last thing I would say is, as a favor to your listeners, if they will go to Blooom.com, and please remember to put the 3 O's in Blooom, Blooom.com/MoneyPeach. That will allow any of your users, well, first of all, anybody can at any time come to that Blooom site and get a free analysis on their 401k. But if you use that link, you get the free analysis on your 401k. And and I say if, you choose to sign up and pay Blooom or to become a client of Blooom, you actually get your first month free. And so take 30 days and decide if it's worth continuing after that with a $10 a month. So you get the free analysis in the first 30 days of being a Blooom client. Test us out, ping us with questions, kick the tires a little bit, and then decide for yourself after 30 days if you want to stick around. So Bloom.com/MoneyPeach, and that'll allow them to get that.
BLOOOM, so 3 O's, BLOOOM. .com/MoneyPeach. We'll put links in the show notes. So at the end of the show, go to the show notes. We'll have links in there as well. If you don't want to remember that, that's fine. Chris, I got to say, I'm really impressed with you guys. I'm really impressed with somebody finally going out there and saying, look, we're going to start focusing, not paying attention, but we're going to start focusing on, the little guy or the middleman, or not the middleman, the people in middle America that are wondering like, hey, I'm over here. Did you guys forget about me? I don't have $3 million to invest. I have 30,000 or I have 10,000 and I just want to get started. And for Netflix prices, I mean, we're talking $10 a month, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no contracts, right? Month to month?
It is purely month to month. It is pay as you go. So like I said earlier, if you don't think it's worth the $10, cancel. And there's no strings attached. There's no gotchas.
I mean, that's incredible. $10 a month. So we have just officially entered into the world where you can have your assets professionally managed for Netflix pricing, right? That's unheard of, right? That's unheard of in the world. If you're paying attention to the financial world, that's just not happening out there. So Chris, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time, come on the show, sharing your passion. You got me fired up. And so I encourage everyone, even if you're not ready to jump in with Blooom, at least take advantage of their free analysis, because free is awesome. So have them go in there, take a look at, your fees. They're going to expose some things that maybe you didn't see or maybe you don't understand, help you understand that. And at least do that, because by doing simply that, you're taking a step in the right direction, and it's free.
Yep.
Chris, anything else you want to say before we head on out?
No, man. Thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for what you're doing. Obviously, this is something in addition to the hours you put into protecting the people around your community. So thank you for getting this kind of information out to people, because you're helping us reach an audience that maybe wouldn't have heard of Blooom without your efforts. So thank you.
Anytime. Hey, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the show notes, the links, anything that Chris and I talked about can be found over at moneypeach.com/session71. That's moneypeach.com/session71. Special thanks goes out to my producers, Steve Stewart, and my assistant, Kayla Sloan. Without them, this show would not be possible. Stay tuned next week where I bring on Jennifer Barrett. Jennifer's in New York City. She is a working mom, and she's coming on the show today to talk about the world of women now making more than their husbands. She calls it the primary breadwinner, the unintentional breadwinner, or the accidental breadwinner, whatever you want to call it. She's coming on the show to talk about that. It's a very interesting subject, and I'm glad that I could be part of it. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Boom, da-ba-doom, boom, da-ba-doom.